It was right here that I think I broke my nose for the first time. We were playing a really terrific game called Trip 'em. I persisted.
You persisted.
This is where I grew up. It's always good to come back. Hello? Hey, brother!
How you doing?
After my brothers went off to the military and I was still just a kid, my daddy had a heart attack. My mom took a minimum wage job to save our house. Now, my parents didn't like to talk about our family's financial problems. I was the opposite. I wanted to pick at it, study it, try to understand it, and do everything I could to make sure it never happened to my family again. I spent years studying and listening to working families like mine. Wages start flattening. And I discovered a disturbing trend. More and more families were going bankrupt. Families like mine were falling further and further behind. And the crisis was hitting families of color even harder. And it was because Washington was listening more and more to big corporations. I started ringing alarm bells.
The idea that we have a strong economy is just false.
And then,
now it's official, we are in a recession.
That's when I left the classroom and got in the fight.
Somebody has got to stand up on behalf of middle-class families.
Elizabeth Warren is heading into the lion's den.
She's become perhaps the leading voice in our country on behalf of consumers.
We created America's first consumer watchdog to hold the big banks accountable. And when Republicans tried to sabotage reform, I ran against one of them, and I beat him. This election is about power. Who has too much of it, and who needs more of it? My daddy was a janitor, but he raised a daughter who got to be a public school teacher, a law professor, a senator, and a candidate for President of the United States. I have lived opportunity. And I believe that no matter where you live in America and no matter where your family came from in the world, you deserve a path to opportunity. We can take on the rich and powerful to make our government work for all of us. And I'm not afraid to fight for it. That's why I'm running for president. It was right here that I think I broke my nose for the first time. We were playing a really terrific game called Trip 'em. I persisted.
You persisted.
This is where I grew up. It's always good to come back. Hello? Hey, brother!
How you doing?
After my brothers went off to the military and I was still just a kid, my daddy had a heart attack. My mom took a minimum wage job to save our house. Now, my parents didn't like to talk about our family's financial problems. I was the opposite. I wanted to pick at it, study it, try to understand it, and do everything I could to make sure it never happened to my family again. I spent years studying and listening to working families like mine. Wages start flattening. And I discovered a disturbing trend. More and more families were going bankrupt. Families like mine were falling further and further behind. And the crisis was hitting families of color even harder. And it was because Washington was listening more and more to big corporations. I started ringing alarm bells.
The idea that we have a strong economy is just false.
And then,
now it's official, we are in a recession.
that's when I left the classroom and got in the fight.
Somebody has got to stand up on behalf of middle-class families.
Elizabeth Warren is heading into the lion's den.
She's become perhaps the leading voice in our country on behalf of consumers.
We created America's first consumer watchdog to hold the big banks accountable. And when Republicans tried to sabotage reform, I ran against one of them, and I beat him. This election is about power. Who has too much of it, and who needs more of it? My daddy was a janitor, but he raised a daughter who got to be a public school teacher, a law professor, a senator, and a candidate for President of the United States. I have lived opportunity. And I believe that no matter where you live in America and no matter where your family came from in the world, you deserve a path to opportunity. We can take on the rich and powerful to make our government work for all of us. And I'm not afraid to fight for it. That's why I'm running for president. It It was right here that I think I broke my nose for the first time. We were playing a really terrific game called Trip 'em. I persisted. This is where I grew up. It's always good to come back. Hello? Hey, brother!
How you doing?
After my brothers went off to the military and I was still just a kid, my daddy had a heart attack. My mom took a minimum wage job to save our house. Now, my parents didn't like to talk about our family's financial problems. I was the opposite. I wanted to pick at it, study it, try to understand it, and do everything I could to make sure it never happened to my family again. I spent years studying and listening to working families like mine. And I discovered a disturbing trend. More and more families were going bankrupt. Families like mine were falling further and further behind. And the crisis was hitting families of color even harder. And it was because Washington was listening more and more to big corporations. I started ringing alarm bells.
The idea that we have a strong economy is just false.
And then
Now it's official, we are in a recession.
that's when I left the classroom and got in the fight.
Somebody has got to stand up on behalf of middle-class families.
Elizabeth Warren.
Elizabeth Warren is heading into the lion's den.
She's become perhaps the leading voice in our country on behalf of consumers.
We created America's first consumer watchdog to hold the big banks accountable. And when Republicans tried to sabotage reform, I ran against one of them, and I beat him. This election is about power. Who has too much of it and who needs more of it? My daddy was a janitor, but he raised a daughter who got to be a public school teacher, a law professor, a senator, and a candidate for President of the United States. I have lived opportunity. And I believe that no matter where you live in America and no matter where your family came from in the world, you deserve a path to opportunity. We can take on the rich and powerful to make our government work for all of us. And I'm not afraid to fight for it. That's why I'm running for president. It was right here that I think I broke my nose for the first time. We were playing a really terrific game called Trip 'em. I persisted. This is where I grew up. It's always good to come back.
How y'all doing today? All right, I'm gonna talk to y'all for a little bit. I'm gonna try to make it as brief as I can. First, I'm gonna tell you where I came from, and then I'll be able to tell you why I'm here. I come from a town called Pineville, South Carolina. It's in the northern part of Berkeley County. I grew up there. It's a pretty rural town. And the truth of the matter is, we struggle. So I've seen firsthand the way struggle can affect people, the way struggle can affect a family, the way struggle can affect a community. But one thing I also realized is that I was raised by 3 generations of fighters. My grandmother was a fighter. My mother was a fighter. And my sister was a fighter. And together they raised me to be the man I am today. And that's what attracted me to Senator Warren's campaign. What I see in her is a thoughtful leader with empathy who understands how so many of these issues affect marginalized communities. And not only is there an understanding there, but I can feel that understanding in plans and policies that she's putting forth to solve those problems. The way that she engages people from the communities where problems disproportionately affect them the most, how she brings them into the process of crafting a solution. And the reality is, in order to win in November, we need a fighter. So again, I'll tell you why I'm here. I'm here because my sister was a poet, my mother was a social worker, and my grandmother was an educator, and that's why I ended up becoming a hip-hop artist who uses poetry to reflect the social issues of my time, and I do my best to make sure that that work educates as many people as it can when they listen to it. They raised a fighter. They raised a fighter who, instead of listening when people told me that hip-hop and this type of music wasn't allowed in so many different places, we kept pushing until it was this very venue right here that I recorded my most recent album, a Water album. And the fight goes on. The fight must continue. We have to keep fighting. I come in a long line of artists who have always fought, and artists who have never been afraid to use their platform and leverage their platform to bring about social change. Paul Robeson, Sam Cooke, Nina Simone, James Baldwin. And there's another artist who I stand in a long line of, an artist that I've been a fan of for years and years. An artist who's not afraid to use his platform to bring about social change. An artist that's not afraid to stand up for justice. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I want to introduce to you a phenomenal songwriter, singer, musician, activist, and one of my inspirations. I want y'all to give a real Charleston welcome to John Legend.
Hello, Charleston. I am so fired up to be here. I love this city. I love being in South Carolina. I bring you greetings from the great state of California. My wife, Chrissy, says hello. Everywhere I go, they ask me, where's Chrissy? Where's Chrissy? I know I'm the second most popular person in my family. Actually, probably fourth now. Luna and Miles are ahead of me, too. I'm happy to report that Chrissy and I have received our mail-in ballots back home in Los Angeles. The ballots are due next week, so I have to send them in tomorrow. But I'm proud to say I've already marked my choice for the presidential nominee from the Democratic Party. I put it in pen. I put it in pen early because I made my decision and I'm not changing my mind. I believe Elizabeth Warren should be the next president of the United States of America. Now, I had a decision to make. I could have kept this to myself. At the beginning of the campaign, I knew there was going to be like 67 candidates in the Democratic primary, and I would have friends voting for all kinds of folks, and some of them working for them, and my intention was to publicly just stay out of it. I wasn't going to endorse anybody for the primary. I would just vote for my preferred candidate, and no matter who won the primary, I'd work my butt off to make sure Donald Trump was a one-term president. I'm a news junkie, though. I started watching the campaigns. I had an open mind. I wanted to see who made the most compelling case. I really didn't know who I was going to vote for. I wanted to see who convinced me that they were ready to be the president that this country needs right now. I watched many of the debates. I saw what the candidates were posting on Twitter. I saw them in town halls and interviews. I read some of their policy positions. And as much as I wanted to publicly stay out of it, it became abundantly clear to me that one candidate stood out from the rest. That one candidate was my clear choice from among a very talented field. That one candidate was Elizabeth Warren. Let me tell you why I'm so confident in Elizabeth Warren. First of all, she's brilliant. Can we acknowledge that? Now, I know the bar is very low right now. We currently have a president who embarrasses this great nation on a daily basis with his incompetence, his lack of preparedness, his unabashed ignorance, and his lack of curiosity. He's a hot mess. Bless his heart, as y'all would say down here. Wouldn't it be so refreshing to have a woman of Senator Warren's brilliance replacing him? Wouldn't it be wonderful to have a woman who came from humble beginnings, worked her way through college and law school, and ascended her way to become a Harvard Law School professor, a U.S. Senator, then President of the United States of America? Wouldn't that be magnificent? But it's not enough that she's brilliant. In a democracy, we don't simply rely on our leaders to tell us what they know, to issue commands from high up in their ivory tower. We depend on our leaders to listen to us. Yes. The best leaders in a democracy are more than just smart people. They have empathy. They care about ordinary people. They are intentional about paying attention to the everyday struggles of people who are often looked. Great leaders in a democracy care about the sick, the forgotten, the marginalized, the poor, the disenfranchised, the incarcerated. They go out of their way to understand the problems that people face, and they have the passion and the resolve to do something about it. How do I know Elizabeth Warren practices empathy? I hear it in the way she answers questions about policy, about what she would do in office. She doesn't just rattle off her prescriptions. You have to listen closely. More than any candidate that I've ever seen, Elizabeth's answers about policy start with a story about people. She talks about a mother she's met who's struggling to get child care. The families she's seen driven to bankruptcy by medical care costs. The communities harmed by racial discrimination. She understands that this diverse nation has all kinds of people, and they deserve a president who listens to their issues and cares about making the government work for all of them. She doesn't spend time whining and dining billionaires so she can fund her campaign. She spends her time talking to the people. If you donate $5 to her campaign, she just might personally call you up and say thank you. If you wait in line with thousands of other people to shake her hand and take a selfie, she often will stand there and do it for each and every person who shows up and waits long enough. Now, why does she do all of that? It's because Elizabeth Warren fundamentally believes that our democracy is in danger, that the government has become too corrupt, too beholden to the interests of the powerful and the connected. And the reason she ran for president was to give this democracy back to its rightful owners. Its rightful owners are the people of the United States of America. That's why she takes the time to listen to each and every one of you. She knows democracy is you. And that's why she's got plans. Yes, y'all know. She's got a plan for that. If you know nothing else about Elizabeth Warren, you know that she has plans that will bring meaningful, positive change to the lives of everyday Americans. You see, she combines her brilliance, her deep understanding of the law and the government, how it all works, with a profound passion for the people, a sense of empathy that informs every plan, every policy. And that's why whenever she says she intends to do something, you can rest assured she's doing it for a reason. She's listened to people like you. She's thought about the impact. She's spoken to experts in the field, and she's resolved to do something to make it happen. Yes. Elizabeth knows that our communities need big structural change, that the system has been rigged for too long against too many people, and she has a plan for all of that. Elizabeth grew up on the edge of the middle class. Unlike any other candidates, her personal, professional, and political experience has been devoted to the most critical issue of our time, the pursuit of equal opportunity for all in the United States. She believes in capitalism, but she knows that we need rules, we need enforcement to make sure it works for everybody, not just the powerful and wealthy. In order for our democracy to work, we need to make sure our politicians know who they're working for. That's why Elizabeth has the most sweeping anti-corruption plan since Watergate. We cannot wait any longer to undo the evil and corruption that Trump has unleashed in the last few years. But it's not enough for us to just undo the damage this president has done in the last few years. We have to make big changes that have been needed for decades. Our country has been horrible at investing in education. Elizabeth will guarantee high quality child care and early education for every child from 0 to 5. And we know our healthcare system has been a mess for a long time. Obamacare did a lot to fix that, but we've got a lot more work to do. The costs are still crushing too many American families, even those who have good insurance. Millions of people with insurance are one bad diagnosis away from going broke. That's why Elizabeth supports Medicare for all, and she plans to fully finance it without raising taxes on the middle class by 1 penny. We also know that racial inequality still runs rampant in our society. We know that this nation's original sin of slavery and its centuries-long devaluing of black lives have had long-lasting effects on the way that black folks live today in 2020. We've seen the data when it comes to the wealth gap, the home ownership gap, the education gap, the disparities in how we're treated by the criminal justice system. But these aren't just graphs and numbers on the page. These are lived experiences. Centuries of trauma and exclusion targeted at our communities. Too many of us know what this looks like and feels like, and Elizabeth has listened to us. She knows that all this harm visited specifically on the black community requires solutions that are specifically targeted to the community. She supports creating a commission on reparations for the descendants of enslaved people. Unlike my former mayor, Mayor Bloomberg, she knows that housing discrimination through redlining has been a national tragedy. And her housing plan creates a first-of-its-kind program to help first-time home buyers living in formerly redlined areas to buy a home and start building the kind of wealth that government-sponsored discrimination denied their parents and grandparents for decades. We were at South Carolina State University in Orangeburg today. She's committed to give $50 billion in investments to historically black colleges and universities like South Carolina State. And for everybody, she'd make technical school, 2-year public college, 4-year public college, free of charge. And she also knows that racism has been codified in our criminal justice system. This is an area I spend a lot of time focused on. We have the most incarcerated country in the world. We have 3% of the world's population, 25% of its prison population. It's outrageous. Elizabeth knows we need progressive criminal justice reform in this nation. She will end cash bail, get rid of private prisons, repeal the '94 crime bill, legalize marijuana, and undo the horrible legacy of the war on drugs. I could go on about Elizabeth's plans for a while. She also has wonderful plans when it comes to the climate crisis, when it comes to immigration, when it comes to protecting women's reproductive rights. But I'm going to get out of the way and let her talk about it herself. Let me just say, before I do, that none of these plans mean anything if you don't have the wherewithal, the passion, the tenacity, that nevertheless she persisted attitude to get them done. And that is perhaps what inspires me the most about Elizabeth Warren. She's not afraid of the fight. She's not afraid to take on the challenge. She has a plan to win. Elizabeth Warren believes in this country. She believes in its people. She believes in democracy. That if we come together, if we listen to one another, if we love one another and value each other's lives, we can build a more perfect union. We can address these problems that have been festering for far too long. We can make big structural change that will improve the lives of millions of everyday people. But none of this happens, Charleston, without you. Elizabeth Warren needs you. This country needs you. Now, like I said, I vote in California. I was born and raised in Ohio. I've never lived in South Carolina. But I flew all the way across the country just to do this today. Because everybody's watching South Carolina. They want to see what happens in this primary. You have the power to send a message that will resound across the nation. Now, I know that folks are worried. Folks are afraid. I'm a little worried too. I know that Donald Trump is an existential threat to this nation, and everybody's hoping and praying we pick the most electable candidate from the Democratic Party. But the fact is, I can't predict who the most electable nominee is. In 2016, we thought we did that. And you probably can't predict who's going to win either. So I'm voting based on who I think will make the best president. I want someone brilliant. I want someone empathetic. I want someone with a plan. I want someone with the fire and the commitment and the persistence to make that plan happen. And I hope you'll join me. I hope you'll vote to make Elizabeth Warren the next president of the United States. Without further ado, please welcome Elizabeth Warren.
Hello, Charleston. So we got to start out tonight on a very sober note, though. Word is just coming in that there's been another mass shooting, this time in Milwaukee. My prayers are with the families, but I will redouble the efforts to break the stronghold of the NRA. We need national gun legislation across this country. Enough. I want to thank you all for being here tonight. I want to say a very special thank you to the folks who did this introduction, to two very extraordinary men. First one, that we bonded over questions about environmental justice and how you make real change in this country, how we understand, go ahead and sit down, how you understand about how Communities of color have just been devastated for generations by the location of polluting factories and toxic waste dumps in their communities, things that have destroyed the health of young children, of seniors, and of economic viability. We had a chance to talk about policy, and a chance for me to say, let's put the right plan together, a plan to commit $1 trillion to clean up the communities that America helped destroy for generations. And I want to thank my partner in that, Benny Starr. Way to go, Benny. I also want to thank another extraordinary man for being out here, a man who brings his talent to his music, but also brings it to his conscience. A man who speaks and sings from the heart. A man who is determined to make this America a better America, the amazing John Legend. Now, tonight, what we're going to do is something a little different. Usually, at the end of one of these things, I like to do a selfie line. But instead of a selfie line, John Legend's going to play some music. It's okay, you can applaud. It doesn't hurt my feelings. I do want to say to you, though, just so we're all clear on this, my name is Elizabeth Warren. I'm the woman who is going to beat Donald Trump. By the way, one other job. I'm going to help take down Lindsey Graham and put Mitch McConnell out of a job. I think Charleston is ready for some big structural change. So here's the thing. I wasn't born a politician, but I was born a fighter. I would tell you a little bit about my background. I was born and raised in Oklahoma. I have 3 older brothers, much older brothers. They all went off and joined the military. Our family didn't have much. We were kind of a paycheck to paycheck family making it through. And when I was in middle school, my daddy had a heart attack. He survived, pulled through. But when he got home, he couldn't go back to work. And so there was a long, long period. There's no money coming in. I still remember the day that we lost the family station wagon. I remember how my mother, at night, she'd come into my bedroom and she'd give me a kiss and pull my blankets up. And I always knew I was coming. She'd give me this big smile. And then she'd walk out of the room, close the door, and I'd hear her start to cry. She never wanted to cry in front of me. I'm in middle school. This is when I learned words like mortgage and foreclosure. And I remember the day, walking into my folks' bedroom, and laid out on the bed was the dress. Now, some of you in this audience will know the dress. It's the one that only comes out for weddings, funerals, and graduations. And there's my mother down by the foot of the bed. She's in her slip and her stocking feet, and she's got her head down, and she's pacing, and she's saying, "We will not lose this house. We will not lose this house. We will not lose this house." She was 50 years old. She had never worked outside the home, and she was terrified. And she stopped and looked up, and she saw me in the doorway. I'm just a kid. And I'm looking at her. She looks at me, and she looks at that dress, and she looks back at me, never says anything. She walks over, she pulls that dress on, she puts on her high heels, and she walks to the Sears, where she gets a full-time minimum wage job answering phones. That minimum wage job saved our house, and more importantly, it saved our family. And it was the first lesson my mother taught me, that no matter how scared you are, and no matter how hard it looks, you get in the fight and you take care of the people you love. Now, it was years later that I came to understand that when I stood there that day, I was also getting a lesson in government. Because when I was a girl, when my mama walked to the Sears, a full-time minimum wage job would support a family of 3. Think about that. It would pay a mortgage, it would cover the utilities, and it would keep food on the table. Today, a full-time minimum wage job in America will not keep a mama and baby out of poverty. That is wrong, and that is why I am in this fight. There it is. And understand this, that difference is no accident. That difference didn't just happen. That difference is a question of who government works for. Because when I was a girl, the question asked on minimum wage was, what does it take a family of 3 to survive? What does it take a family to get a toehold in America's middle class? What does it take a family to have something solid that they can build on? Today, the question asked in Washington about the minimum wage is, where do we set it to maximize the profits of giant multinational corporations? Well, I don't want a government that works for giant multinational corporations. I want one that works for our families. And there is the heart of the problem in America. A government that works great for those with money. Think of it this way. We've got a government that works great for giant drug companies, just not for anybody trying to get a prescription filled. Yeah, we got a government that works great for folks who want to make a little money. Oh, investing in private prisons and private detention centers, but not for the human beings whose lives are torn apart by those places. We've got a government that works great for giant oil companies that want to drill everywhere, just not for the rest of us who see climate change bearing down upon us. Here's the thing. When you see a government that works great for those with money, for those who can hire armies of lobbyists and lawyers and PR firms and think tanks and bought and paid for experts, and it's not working so great for everyone else, that is corruption, pure and simple, and we need to call it out for what it is. Corruption. And understand this, whatever issue gets you up in the morning, whether your issue is gun safety or health care or student loan debt or climate, whatever is your issue, if there is a decision to be made in Washington, it has been influenced by money. It has been shaped by money. It has had exceptions created by money. Money, money, money is driving the decisions in Washington. Well, I say it is time for us to get off our back foot, get on our front foot, and attack that corruption head on. And I got a plan for that. In fact, here's the good news. I have the biggest anti-corruption plan since Watergate. It's a big one. Here's the bad news. We need the biggest anti-corruption plan since Watergate. So let me just give you just a little sample from it, just a little tasting part of it. Here we go. First thing, end lobbying as we know it. Enough. Block the revolving door between Wall Street and Washington. Here's one you might not have thought about. make the United States Supreme Court follow basic rules of ethics. And you really want to hose out a little of the corruption in Washington? Make every single person who runs for federal office put their tax returns online. Because here's the thing. We break up the influence of money. We don't have to get rid of it entirely. I get it. It'll be hard. But we break up the influence of money, and now we got the possibility for making real change in this country. Let me just mention a couple of the things we can do. It is time for a wealth tax in America. So this one is such a cool idea. I love it. So here it is. This is a tax on fortunes above $50 million. So just for those of you who were worried, your first 50 mil is free and clear. But your 50 millionth and first dollar, you got to pitch in 2 cents. And 2 cents on every dollar after that, you hit the billionaire, you got to pitch in a couple more pennies. Okay, so that's the basic idea. And by the way, anybody in here own a home or grew up in a family that owned a home? Yeah, you paid a wealth tax forever. It's just called a property tax. And all I'm saying that's different is for that top 0.1%, their property tax should include the real estate, but also the stock portfolio, the diamonds, the Rembrandt, and the yacht. Now, this idea is really popular. I just want you to know this among Democrats and among Republicans. Not elected ones, but the other kind, right? It is not popular with some billionaires. Some have gone on TV and cried about it. So sad. Others have run for president. I guess they thought it would be cheaper. But here's their argument. They say, wait, come on, this isn't fair for us to get taxed. After all, I had a great idea and I followed it through and I worked hard and I made this money. To which I say, good for you. That's great. I'm glad you made this money. Yeah, you bet. Celebrate, but understand this. You built a great fortune here in America. I guarantee you built it at least in part using workers all of us help pay to educate. You built it at least in part getting your goods to market on roads and bridges all of us help pay to build. You built it at least in part protected by police and firefighters all of us help pay their salaries. And here's the thing, we are glad to do it. We are happy to do it. We want to do it. We invest in opportunity. All we're saying is when you make it big, I mean really big, I mean top 0.1% big. Pitch in 2 cents so everybody else gets a chance to make it. 2 cents. 2 cents. Oh, 2 cents. Because here comes the fun part. What can you do for 2 cents? Wow. So I'll tell you where I'm going to start this. Universal child care and early education for every baby in this country age 0 to 5. Universal pre-K for every 3-year-old and 4-year-old in America. And stop exploiting the people, largely women, largely black and brown women who do this work. Raise the wages of every child care worker and preschool teacher in this country. We can do that. 2 cents. 2 cents. We can do that for our babies and more. We can put $800 billion new dollars into our public schools. Every school in South Carolina can be an excellent school. We can quadruple our funding for Title I schools. Let's really level the playing field. And for the first time in history, We can fully fund IDEA so children with disabilities get a full education. That's what we can do. 2 cents. We can do all that for our babies. We can do all that for K-12. Plus, anybody who wants to get an education after high school, we can make technical school, 2-year college, 4-year college, tuition free. We can raise the Pell Grants so there's real opportunity. And we can level the playing field and correct a lot of historic discrimination, put $50 billion into our historically black colleges and universities. 2 cents. 2 cents. And there's one more thing we can do with that money. 2 cents, we can cancel student loan debt for 43 million Americans. There is so much we can do. Think about building a future. Instead of leaving that 2% with the millionaires and billionaires who are already growing their fortunes at 6%, 8%, 10% a year, pitch in 2%. And we can invest in an entire generation of young people. All of us, that's the future we can build. Now, okay, you know me. I go on and on about the policies because I'm so excited about the things we could do, the investments we can make in housing, the changes we can make in criminal justice system, the way that we can build an immigration system that works for everyone and a pathway to citizenship for our friends and neighbors who are here. So much we can do, but it all turns on that first point I make, who government works for. We have a government that works for a handful of rich people at the top. Things are going to stay like they are. But we change that, and the whole world starts to look different. And in order to make that happen, we've got to protect our democracy. We've got to protect our democracy. So here's how I see this. I support a constitutional amendment to guarantee the right of every American citizen to vote and to get that vote counted. I'm going to push for a federal law to roll back all political gerrymandering. And one more federal law to roll back every racist voter suppression law in this country. And just one more. Overturn Citizens United. Democracy is not for sale. So I love this. Yes, it's going to be a fight, but it is a righteous fight. You know, my heart is filled with hope, but I have to tell you, I go around this country and I meet people. In 3 years of Donald Trump, people are scared. People are worried. I talk to people who are worried, scared for their families, afraid for their friends and for their neighbors, afraid for children locked in cages at our borders, afraid for children on lockdown in our public schools, afraid for women, afraid for people of color, afraid for LGBTQ people, all of whose rights are up for grabs in this Supreme Court. Afraid for our nation and afraid for our planet. And here's the thing, the danger is real. Our democracy hangs in the balance in this election. So you have a decision to make. And that is, when there is so much at stake, when there is so much danger out there, do we cower? Do we move back? Do we look back? Or do we fight back? Me, I'm fighting back. I'm fighting back. I'm fighting back. Fighting back is an act of patriotism. Look, we fought back to build this nation. We fought back against a king to do it. We fought back against the scourge of slavery to hold this union together. We fought back against a Great Depression to rebuild this economy. We fought back against the rise of fascism to protect our democracy. Americans are at our best. When we see a problem, we call it out and we fight back. This is no time for small ideas. This is no time to nibble around the edges of what is broken. This is no time to raise nostalgia for the past. No, this is a time to recognize we have big problems in this country, but we are capable of bigger solutions. I'm not in this fight because I have a campaign that has been carefully shaped by consultants. I'm not in this to put forward a bunch of proposals that have been carefully designed not to offend big donors. I passed that stop sign a long time ago. I am in this campaign based on a lifetime of fighting for working families. I am in this fight from the heart because I believe in you. And I believe in the America that we can build together. I believe in the America in which every single person has value. The America in which every single child is worth investing in. The America where in our democracy, the most important thing is not money, it is people. That is the America I believe in. I can see that America. I can see it. And if you believe that that America is possible, if you believe that America is worth fighting for, then I'm asking you, get in this fight. Get in this fight. Vote for me. And more. Volunteer, talk to your neighbors, but get in the fight because understand this. 2020 is the moment in history that we have been called to. 2020 is our moment, and it will not come our way again. 2020 is our time to choose hope over fear. 2020 is our time to choose courage over cynicism. 2020 is our time to dream big, fight hard, and win.
It was right here that I think I broke my nose for the first time. We were playing a really terrific game called Trip 'em. I persisted.
You persisted.
This is where I grew up. It's always good to come back. Hello? Hey, brother!
How you doing?
After my brothers went off to the military and I was still just a kid, my daddy had a heart attack. My mom took a minimum wage job to save our house. Now, my parents didn't like to talk about our family's financial problems. I was the opposite. I wanted to pick at it, study it, try to understand it, and do everything I could to make sure it never happened to my family again. I spent years studying and listening to working families like mine. And I discovered a disturbing trend. More and more families were going bankrupt. Families like mine were falling further and further behind. And the crisis was hitting families of color even harder. And it was because Washington
was listening more and more to big corporations. I started ringing alarm bells.
The idea that we have a strong economy is just false.
And then
Now it's official, we are in a recession.
that's when I left the classroom and got in the fight.
Somebody has got to stand up on behalf of middle-class families.
Elizabeth Warren.
Elizabeth Warren is heading into the lion's den.
She's become perhaps the leading voice in our country on behalf of consumers.
We created America's first consumer watchdog to hold the big banks accountable. And when Republicans tried to sabotage reform, I ran against one of them, and I beat him. This election is about power. Who has too much of it and who needs more of it? My daddy was a janitor, but he raised a daughter who got to be a public school teacher, a law professor, a senator, and a candidate for president of the United States. I have lived opportunity, and I believe that no matter where you live in America and no matter where your family came from in the world, you deserve a path to opportunity. We can take on the rich and powerful to make our government work for all of us. And I'm not afraid to fight for it. That's why I'm running for president.